The Luna selection was supposed to find the king a worthy mate. Instead, it had become a spectacle of blood and broken bones. For 3 months, noblewomen from across Thornreach had approached the legendary warhorse, Valdris, and for 3 months, Valdris had thrown them, bitten them, and trampled the ground before their feet until they fled screaming. The beast that had carried Alpha King Riven through 17 battles would not accept a single one of them. Neve watched from the shadows where servants belonged, her hands raw from carrying her sister's luggage across the palace grounds. She was not a candidate. She was nothing. The daughter Aldrich Vance kept hidden, the one whose touch made animals follow her like she was made of moonlight and madness. Beast Speaker, they whispered. Cursed blood, unfit for any pack. Her sister Sorrel was the real candidate. Beautiful, legitimate, dripping with noble grace. She was supposed to be the one Valdris chose. But when Sorrel approached the warhorse, when the great black beast reared with murder in its eyes, it was Neve who moved without thinking. Neve whose hand pressed against that midnight flank. Neve who felt the creature's fury melt into something that terrified her far more. Stillness. Then the warhorse. The beast that had maimed 6 women and killed 1, lowered its massive head and knelt before her. The courtyard went silent. Alpha King Riven descended the steps, his scarred face unreadable, and stopped directly in front of the servant girl everyone had overlooked. "I'll take her," he said. He would marry her, protect her, give her everything she could need. He would even swear to ask nothing about the strange power she clearly possessed. But only under one condition. He would never love her. Neither of them understood how impossible that vow would become. The courtyard of Thornreach Palace had been transformed into an arena of judgment. Silk banners snapped in the wind, bearing the king's crest, a silver wolf mid-howl against a field of black. Spectators lined the stone walls 3 rows deep, nobles and commoners alike craning for a glimpse of the drama unfolding below. At the center stood Valdris. Neve had heard stories of the Alpha King's warhorse since childhood, how the beast had been born during a lightning storm, how no rider but Riven himself had ever mounted him, how Valdris had once torn through an enemy battalion and emerged with blood dripping from his muzzle like a wolf instead of a horse. The stories had not prepared her for the reality. Valdris was enormous. His coat was the black of a moonless night, his mane tangled with what looked like leather war braids, but it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were not the dull eyes of livestock. They burned with intelligence, with fury, with something ancient and knowing that made Neve's spine prickle. "Stop staring and hold this properly," Sorrel hissed, shoving a velvet cloak into Neve's arms. "You're embarrassing me." Neve ducked her head. "Forgive me, sister." She was not truly Sorrel's servant. They shared a father, shared blood. But Aldrich Vance had made the hierarchy clear since Neve's 5th birthday, when the stable dogs had followed her home in a line like soldiers, and her mother had wept with horror. Beast Speaker, the old curse, the tainted blood that surfaced once every few generations, marking its bearer as something not quite wolf, not quite human, not quite anything acceptable. Her mother had been banished for producing such a child. Neve had been kept only because killing her might draw attention. So she existed in the space between family and furniture, tending Sorrel's needs, swallowing her father's disgust, hiding the power that hummed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. A scream tore through the courtyard. Neve's head snapped up. Another candidate, a duke's daughter in powder blue silk, was scrambling backward across the cobblestones. Blood streamed from a gash on her forearm where Valdris's teeth had found purchase. The warhorse stamped and snorted, ears flat against his skull. "That makes 14, someone muttered nearby. 14 failures. The beast is cursed. No, the king is cursed. Everyone knows it." Neve filed that away. She had heard whispers about Alpha King Riven for years, that he was cold beyond reason, that he had not taken a lover since returning from the border wars, that something had happened in those mountains, something that had changed him. But rumors were not her concern. Surviving today was. "Lady Sorrel Vance," the herald called. Sorrel straightened, her beautiful face arranging into an expression of serene confidence. She was everything Neve was not. Golden-haired, green-eyed, with curves that made men stammer and women seethe. Their father had groomed her for this moment since birth. "Wish me fortune," Sorrel murmured. "Fortune favor you," Neve replied automatically. Sorrel swept forward, silk skirts trailing across stone. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Even Neve had to admit her sister moved like water, all grace and deliberate beauty. Valdris watched her approach. The warhorse had gone still in a way that made Neve's instincts scream. She knew animals. She had spent her life learning their languages, their moods, the subtle shifts in muscle and breath that preceded violence. And Valdris was not calm. He was waiting. Sorrel extended her hand, palm up, the way they had all been instructed. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Valdris exploded. The warhorse reared with a sound that was more roar than whinny, hooves slashing the air inches from Sorrel's face. Sorrel stumbled backward, her composure shattering into a shriek. Valdris came down hard and lunged, teeth bared, and Neve saw what would happen next with perfect clarity. He would kill her. Neve moved. She did not think, did not calculate. One moment she stood among the servants, and the next she was between Sorrel and 600 pounds of murderous warhorse, her hand pressed flat against Valdris's chest. Enough. The word came out quiet, calm, carrying the weight of something that was not quite command and not quite request, but something older. Something that bypassed the thinking mind and spoke directly to blood and bone and instinct. Valdris froze. His muscles trembled beneath her palm. She could feel his heartbeat, wild and furious, feel the rage still burning through him. But he did not move. His great head lowered, nostrils flaring, dark eyes fixed on her face. Neve held his gaze. She should not. Looking an animal in the eye was challenge, but she was already damned, already exposed, already ruined. What did one more transgression matter? "I know," she whispered, so soft that only Valdris could hear. "I know you are tired. I know they parade strangers before you and expect submission. But she is my sister. Please." The warhorse exhaled, a great gust of hot breath that stirred her hair. Then slowly, impossibly, Valdris lowered himself to his front knees and bowed his head. The courtyard went utterly silent. Neve's heart hammered against her ribs. She became aware, suddenly and horribly, of every eye upon her, the servants, the nobles, the candidates who had failed. Her father, whose face had gone the color of old ash. And on the steps above them all, the Alpha King. Riven descended without hurry. Each step rang against stone, measured and deliberate, the gait of a predator who had no need to rush. The crowd parted before him like water before a blade. He was taller than she expected, broader. The scars that crossed his face only made him look more dangerous, pale lines against sun-darkened skin. His hair was dark and cropped close, military short, and his eyes, when they found hers, were the gray of winter storms. Cold. So cold it made her shiver. He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell him. Leather, wood smoke, something metallic beneath. "Your name," he said. Not a question, a command. "Neve," she managed. "Neve Vance." His gaze flicked to Valdris, still kneeling, then back to her. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth. Nothing so hopeful. But interest, perhaps. And the first spark of anything human she had seen in those frozen eyes. "I'll take her," he announced. The words fell like stones into still water. "Your Majesty," Sorrel gasped, pushing forward. "There must be some mistake. She is nobody. A servant. My father's shame. She cannot possibly be considered for... I was not asking permission." The Alpha King did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The authority in his tone could have frozen fire. "Valdris has chosen. That is the law I set. That is the law I will honor." He looked at Neve again, and she felt his gaze like a physical weight. "You will be my Luna," he said. "My queen. My mate in name, if nothing else." Neve's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Behind her, she heard her father make a strangled noise of rage, heard Sorrel's sharp intake of breath, heard the crowd erupt into whispers that would become rumors that would become legends. But all she could focus on was the war horse rising to his feet beside her, pressing his great warm flank against her side as if to say, "I chose. Now see what happens." And the Alpha King, watching her with eyes that promised nothing but winter. The carriage moved through the palace gates as evening bled across the sky. Neve sat rigid on velvet cushions, her servant's dress absurdly out of place against such luxury, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. None of this made sense. Through the window, she watched the spires of Thornreach Palace grow smaller. She had never been inside the royal residence before today. Now she was leaving it to go to the king's personal fortress, in the stronghold in the northern mountains where Riven conducted his rule far from the capital's politics. "You are frightened." The voice came from the shadows across from her. Neve startled. She had thought she was alone, but there sat a woman in servant's gray, middle-aged and plain-featured, watching her with sharp dark eyes. "I am the king's housekeeper," the woman said. "Matilda. I will prepare you for what comes next." "And what comes next?" Matilda studied her for a long moment. "His Majesty will explain his terms. I suggest you listen carefully. He does not repeat himself." The journey took 4 hours. Neve watched the landscape shift from rolling farmland to dense forest to jagged mountain slopes, where the trees grew twisted and the shadows pooled like ink. By the time the carriage halted, and the stars had emerged and her legs had gone numb from sitting, the fortress was not beautiful. It was brutal. Gray stone walls rose against the darker gray of mountains, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows across weathered battlements. This was not a palace. This was a place built for war, for survival, for keeping the world at bay. Guards flanked the great door. They did not bow or acknowledge her. They simply watched, faces blank, as Matilda led her inside. The corridors were warmer than she expected. Tapestries softened the stone walls, depicting hunts and battles and wolves running beneath red moons. Fires burned in iron braziers at regular intervals, but the warmth felt superficial, like a thin blanket over something frozen beneath. "His Majesty is in the study," Matilda said. "Wait here." She indicated a door, then disappeared down the corridor without another word. Neve stood alone in the silence. Her reflection watched her from a polished shield mounted on the wall. A small woman in ill-fitting clothes, brown hair escaping its pins, face pale with exhaustion and terror. She did not look like a queen. She looked like exactly what she was: a mistake, a servant, a girl whose only gift was speaking to creatures that decent people feared. The door opened. "Enter." She obeyed. The study was smaller than she expected, lined with books and maps and the accumulated debris of governance. A fire crackled in the hearth, throwing shifting light across the face of the man who stood before it. Alpha King Riven had changed from his formal attire. He wore simple dark clothing now, the kind of thing a soldier might wear, practical and unadorned. Without the trappings of royalty, he should have looked diminished. He did not. If anything, stripped of ceremony, his presence felt more potent. The scars stood out starkly against his skin. The breadth of his shoulders blocked the fire's glow. And when he turned to look at her, those winter-gray eyes held no more warmth than they had in the courtyard. "Sit," he said. Neve lowered herself into a chair by the desk. He did not sit. He remained standing, arms crossed, watching her with the patient attention of someone cataloging potential threats. "Your Majesty," she began, "I must explain. What happened with Valdris, I did not mean—" "You did not mean to reveal that you possess Beast Speaker blood." His voice was flat. "You did not mean to interfere. And you did not mean to become the first person in 17 years that my warhorse has accepted." She flinched. "Yes, I do not care. The words hung between them. Neve waited for elaboration. None came. You do not care? She repeated carefully. What you are. What power you possess. What your father's reasons were for hiding you among the servants. He shrugged. A small, controlled motion. None of it concerns me. Valdris chose you. That is what matters. The law's the law. But I will marry you. He cut her off without raising his voice. You will be Luna of Thornreach. You will have wealth, status, protection. You will want for nothing material for the rest of your life. Neve's throat tightened. This should have been joy. This should have been relief. But the cold precision of his words turned them into something else entirely. In exchange, Riven continued, you will give me heirs. 2, at minimum, to secure the succession. You will appear beside me at essential functions, 4 or 5 times yearly. No more. You will not interfere with governance. You will not question my decisions. You will not expect my time, my attention, or my affection outside of what is required to produce children. Each condition landed like a blow. And if I refuse? She heard herself ask. Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger. Something closer to surprise, as if refusal had not occurred to him as a possibility. Then I return you to your father. The threat did not need elaboration. Neve understood exactly what awaited her in Aldrich Vance's keeping. She had seen it in his face the moment Valdris knelt. Fury, humiliation, the kind of rage that would find outlets in flesh and bone. I accept, she said quietly. Riven nodded as if this had been inevitable. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. One final condition. Neve braced herself. I will not love you. He did not turn around. His voice carried no cruelty, no satisfaction. Only the flat certainty of a man stating mathematical facts. I am incapable of it. Whatever you may hope, whatever fantasies you may construct, understand this now. You will have my name, my protection, my kingdom. But you will never have me. He pulled open the door. The wedding is in 3 days. Matilda will see to your preparations. And then he was gone, leaving Neve alone in the firelight with the echo of the coldest promise she had ever heard. The morning of the contract signing dawned gray and bitter. Neve had barely slept. The chambers they had given her were larger than her father's entire house, furnished with velvet and mahogany and silk, but luxury could not quiet the chaos in her mind. Matilda arrived at dawn with a team of silent maids. They bathed her, dressed her in a gown of deep green, and braided her hair into something approaching elegance. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger. A noblewoman. A future queen. A lie. The council awaits, Matilda said. The council chamber occupied the heart of the fortress, a circular room with a vaulted ceiling and windows that looked out over mountain peaks. A great table dominated the space, surrounded by men in formal attire who fell silent the moment Neve entered. Riven sat at the head of the table. He did not rise when she entered, but his eyes tracked her movement with that same unsettling attention. Lady Neve, he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Sit. She sat. Only then did she notice her father. Aldrich Vance occupied a chair at the far end of the table, his face carefully blank. Beside him sat Sorrel, her beauty diminished by the fury barely contained behind her pleasant expression. They had been summoned as witnesses, Neve realized, forced to watch their shame become official. The contract has been prepared according to His Majesty's specifications, announced an elderly advisor, sliding a document across the table. If we might review the terms. That will not be necessary. Riven picked up the document, scanned it briefly, then set it before Neve. The terms are simple. I will protect you with my name, my resources, and my authority. No one, including your family, will have power over you again. In exchange, you will provide heirs for the succession. We will not share a life beyond what is required for that purpose. The advisor shifted uncomfortably. Aldrich's jaw clenched. Before we proceed, her father interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. Perhaps His Majesty should know certain facts about my daughter's condition. Neve's blood went cold. Father, please. She is unnatural, Your Majesty. Aldrich leaned forward, his mask of civility cracking. The beast speaker blood. You saw what she did with your horse. That power does not come without cost. Our family has been plagued by her kind for generations. They bring madness, corruption. She should have been drowned at birth. But her mother... Lord Vance. Riven's voice cut through the tirade like a blade through silk. I did not give you permission to speak. Silence crashed over the room. Aldrich's face went purple, but he pressed his lips together, visibly trembling with suppressed rage. Riven turned to Neve. His expression had not changed, but something in his eyes had sharpened. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. Do you wish me to remove him? The question staggered her. Not because it was offered, but because it sounded genuine, as if her comfort actually mattered to him. He is still my father, she heard herself say. Let him stay. A flicker of approval crossed Riven's face, or simply acknowledgement. He turned back to the council. The terms, he continued as if no interruption had occurred, are final. Lady Neve will become Luna of Thornreach. She will be accorded all rights and privileges of that position. Any insult to her will be treated as an insult to me personally. His gaze settled on Aldrich. Any attempt to undermine her will be treated as treason. The word hung in the air like an executioner's axe. Is this agreeable to you? Riven asked, looking at Neve. She met his eyes, winter gray, cold and deep. But he was asking. Despite the power he held, despite the fact that he could simply command and be obeyed, he was asking. Yes, Your Majesty. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. It is more than agreeable. You honor me greatly. Riven's brow furrowed slightly. Honor you? Yes. Neve held his gaze. You offer protection without demanding explanation. You silence those who would condemn me without hearing my crime. You treat my consent as something worth seeking. She paused, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Where I come from, such things are not common. So yes, you honor me. For a long moment, Riven simply looked at her. The confusion in his eyes made him seem almost human. You are a strange woman, he said finally. Most would weep at such terms. Most would rage at a loveless marriage. Most, Neve replied quietly, have not lived as I have lived. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth, but the sharp edge of his coldness seemed to dull, just slightly. Sign here, he said, sliding the contract toward her. She signed. Her father signed as witness, his hand shaking with barely contained fury. The advisors added their seals. And then it was done. Neve Vance, Beast Speaker, servant, family shame, was going to be queen. The council dispersed. Aldrich left without looking at her, his rigid back radiating hatred. Sorrel lingered, her green eyes glittering with something between envy and malice, before following their father out. Neve had nearly reached the corridor when a hand closed around her arm. She spun to find Sorrel, her beautiful face twisted into something ugly. You think you've won, Sorrel hissed. You think because the king chose you, because that demon horse bowed to your cursed blood, that you've escaped. Neve tried to pull away. Sorrel's grip tightened. He doesn't know, does he? Her sister's voice dropped to a whisper. He doesn't know about the hollowing, about what your power really costs, about what happens to anyone who gets too close to you. The words struck like physical blows. That's not... Tristan. Sorrel's eyes burned. You remember Tristan, the stable boy who followed you around like a lost puppy, the one who died in his sleep 3 days after you touched him. That was fever. The healers said what father told them to say. Sorrel released her arm, stepping back with a cold smile. Beast speakers don't just communicate with animals, sister. They drain life. It's in all the old texts. Every creature that loves you weakens. Every person who cares for you dies. Her smile widened. The king might be cold, but he's still alive. For now. She turned and walked away, silk skirts whispering against stone. Neve stood frozen in the corridor, her sister's words echoing in her skull. It wasn't true. It couldn't be true. The hollowing was a myth, a legend used to frighten children. But Tristan had died. And so had her mother's hunting hound, the one who had slept at the foot of her bed. And so had the 3 songbirds she had kept as a girl, one by one, their bright eyes going dull. Coincidence. It had to be coincidence. But as she walked toward her chambers, as she passed a window overlooking the courtyard where Valdris stood alone in his paddock, watching her with those knowing eyes, a terrible fear took root in her chest. What if loving her really was a death sentence? And what if the king, with his impossible coldness, was the only one who might survive? The Cathedral of Thornreach had stood for 600 years. Its spires clawed at the sky like stone fingers, and its stained glass windows cast fractured rainbows across the assembly gathered within. Neve walked the aisle alone. There had been talk of her father escorting her, tradition demanding it. Riven had refused. She enters as herself, he had said, and the matter was closed. So she walked alone, her green gown trailing behind her, her hair woven with silver threads that caught the candlelight. The pews were packed with nobility, merchants and military officers, all of them staring at the beast speaker's servant girl who had somehow captured a king's warhorse. Whispers followed her like shadows. Look at her, common as dirt beneath the finery. The horse chose her. What does that say about our king? Perhaps she bewitched the beast. Perhaps she'll bewitch him too. Neve kept her eyes forward. At the altar, beneath a window depicting wolves hunting beneath a blood-red moon, Riven waited. He wore black, naturally. Formal military attire that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the severity of his scars. A ceremonial sword hung at his hip. He looked like what he was, a warrior king, forged in battle, unbroken by anything the world had thrown at him. When their eyes met, Neve felt something shift in her chest. Not warmth, not quite, but recognition perhaps. 2 damaged creatures, finding themselves bound by circumstance and a horse's impossible choice. She reached the altar. The high priest began to speak, his voice echoing through the vast space. Neve barely heard the words. She was too aware of Riven beside her, radiating that strange coldness that seemed to intensify the closer she stood. Other alphas ran hot. Everyone knew this. The fire of the wolf burned in their blood, keeping them warm even in the deepest winter. But Riven felt like winter itself had taken residence in his bones. The rings, the priest announced. Riven turned to face her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the evidence of nights without sleep and burdens without relief. He took her hand and she gasped. His fingers were like ice, not cool, not chilly. Genuinely, impossibly cold, as if he had been holding snow for hours. Neve stared at their joined hands, her warm skin against his frozen grip, and something twisted in her stomach. This was not natural. Something was wrong with him. Neve. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. The ring. She fumbled with the band, sliding it onto his finger. When he placed the matching ring on hers, the cold metal felt warm compared to his touch. By the authority vested in me, the priest intoned, I pronounce you husband and wife, Alpha and Luna, bound by sacred oath until death separates you. The claiming words came next, and they could not complete the physical claim here, could not bite and mark each other as true mates. That would come later, in private. I claim you as mine, Riven said, his voice carrying through the cathedral. My wife, my Luna, my queen. The words should have sounded romantic. Instead, they fell like statements of fact, cold and precise as everything else about him. I claim you as mine, Neve echoed. My husband, my alpha, my king. She felt no snap of a mate bond, no overwhelming certainty, just the strange hollowness of words spoken without feeling. The priest smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Your Majesty." The cathedral went silent, every eye fixed upon them, waiting for the moment when the Alpha King would claim his new Luna's lips before the gathered court. Riven looked at her. Those winter-gray eyes searched her face, seeing something she could not name. "Do you want me to kiss you?" he asked, soft enough that only she could hear. The question surprised her. "Isn't it expected?" "I am not asking about expectations. I am asking about you." Neva's heart stuttered. In all her life, no one had asked what she wanted. Not her father, not Sorrel, not the servants who tolerated her presence, or the nobles who looked through her as if she were made of glass. "I do not know you," she said honestly. A kiss should mean something. Something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth, but perhaps the ghost of it. "Then we wait," he said simply. Before the court, before the hundreds of witnesses expecting a romantic display, Riven lifted her hand to his lips instead. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was gentle, formal, and cold as morning frost. The crowd murmured in confusion. Disappointment rippled through the assembly. But Neve stood frozen, her hand still tingling from that brief contact, her chest tight with something she could not name. He had asked. He had respected her answer. He had defied expectations to honor her uncertainty. "Thank you," she whispered. Riven released her hand and offered his arm. Together, they walked down the aisle as husband and wife, as Alpha and Luna, as two strangers bound by a horse's choice and a kingdom's need. Outside, the crowd's roar hit them like a physical force. Thousands had gathered to glimpse their new queen. "She's beautiful enough, I suppose. But why her? Of all the candidates, why the beast speaker? The king must have his reasons. He always has reasons." Neve glanced at Riven as he led her toward the waiting carriage. Keeg, his face betrayed nothing, but she noticed how he positioned himself between her and the most aggressive parts of the crowd, how his cold hand remained steady on hers, how he moved with the deliberate awareness of someone accustomed to protecting what was his. He would not love her. He had made that clear. But perhaps, she thought as the carriage doors closed around them, perhaps there were worse things than being protected by someone cold. After all, she knew what warmth had cost her. The fortress was silent as death when they arrived at her chambers. Neve stood by the window watching moonlight paint silver across the mountain peaks. Behind her, the massive bed loomed like a threat. The maids Riven had assigned to her, two older women with gentle hands and silent efficiency, had bathed her, brushed her hair, and dressed her in a nightgown of white silk. Then they had left her alone to wait for her husband. For the consummation. The word sat heavy in her mind. She understood what was required. She understood that children were the purpose of this arrangement, the transaction that justified her elevation from servant to queen. But understanding did not quiet the fear that crawled beneath her skin. Not fear of him. Not exactly. Fear of herself. The hollowing. Sorrel's words echoed. "Every creature that loves you weakens. Every person who cares for you dies." 3 knocks at the door. "Come in," she managed. Riven entered and stopped just inside the threshold. He had changed from his ceremonial attire into simple dark clothing, a white shirt unlaced at the throat, dark trousers, nothing more. Without the formal trappings, he looked almost approachable. Almost. "You are frightened," he said. It was not a question. "I am," Neve admitted. There seemed no point in lying. "I have never... This is new to me." His expression changed subtly. Not softness, but something adjacent to it. "I brought something." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a strip of black silk. "A blindfold. For me." Neve blinked. "For you?" "I understand that vulnerability is difficult. If you would prefer that I cannot see you, I will wear this." He held it out like an offering. "The choice is yours." Her throat tightened. She thought of all the things she had been told about alphas, about kings, about men who held power. They took. They demanded. They did not ask permission, did not offer consideration, and did not present blindfolds so their brides might feel less exposed. "Why would you do that?" she asked quietly. Riven was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully measured. "I told you I would never love you. That was not cruelty. It was truth. But that does not mean I intend to be unkind." He set the blindfold on the dresser. "You did not choose this any more than I did. The least I can offer is respect." Neve stared at him. At the scars that crossed his face, the evidence of violence survived. At the coldness in his eyes, that winter that never thawed. At the blindfold resting between them, a gesture so unexpected it made her chest ache. "I don't want you blind," she said finally. "But the candles. Could we?" "Of course." He moved through the room, extinguishing each flame with quick efficiency. Darkness fell like velvet, softening everything, turning the world to shapes and shadows and the sound of breathing. "Where are you?" she whispered. "Here." His voice came from directly before her. She felt the cold radiating from him like morning mist, felt the air shift as he moved closer. "May I touch you?" "Yes." His hands found her shoulders. She gasped at the temperature. His palms were like ice against her bare skin, cold enough that she should have flinched away. Instead, she found herself leaning into the contact. "You are so warm," Riven murmured, something like wonder in his voice. I had forgotten what warmth felt like. "And you are so cold," she replied. "Does it hurt?" A pause. I no longer remember what it felt like before. There was pain in those words, buried deep beneath layers of control. Neve found herself wanting to dig for it, and to understand what had happened to make him this way. But his hands were moving now, sliding down her arms with careful deliberation, and thought became difficult. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he said. "I don't want you to stop." The words surprised them both. In the darkness, Riven's coldness became something else. It became contrast, his icy touch against her heated skin, each point of contact sending sparks through her nervous system. She explored him in return, her warm fingers tracing the ridges of his scars, the planes of his chest, the architecture of a body built for war. When he kissed her, finally, truly, his lips were cool but soft. She tasted winter on his tongue, felt the restraint in how carefully he held her, as if she were something precious that might shatter under pressure. Neve. Her name in his mouth sounded different than it ever had before. Reverent, almost. "Are you certain?" "Yes," she breathed. "I am certain." He carried her to the bed with impossible gentleness. When his body covered hers, the weight of him felt like safety rather than imprisonment. The cold of his skin met the warmth of hers, and where they touched, something sparked. They found their rhythm slowly. He was patient, careful, attentive to every sound she made, every shift of her body. When discomfort crossed her features, he stilled. When pleasure replaced it, he moved with renewed purpose. It was nothing like she had imagined, nothing like the rough claiming she had feared. He was not tender, not exactly, but he was thorough. He learned her the way a commander learns terrain, mapping every response, cataloging every reaction. When she cried out, clutching his shoulders, something shifted in his scent. The cold winter sharpness gave way to something warmer beneath, something almost human. After, they lay tangled together in darkness. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, slow and steady, feel the cold of his skin beginning to warm where it pressed against hers. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For tonight." Before she could respond, he kissed her shoulder and pulled away. She heard him dressing in the darkness, heard his footsteps moving toward the door. "Riven?" She sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. You don't have to leave. A pause. Then quietly, yes, I do. The door opened and closed. Neve sat alone in the darkness, her body still humming with sensation, in her mind churning with questions. He had been gentle, considerate, almost kind, but something in those final words, that certainty that he must leave, told her there was more to his coldness than simple emotional distance. Something was wrong with the Alpha King, and Neve was determined to discover what. The days that followed blurred into weeks. Neve had expected Riven to visit her once, perhaps twice, fulfill his duty, and then retreat to his separate life. Instead, he appeared at her door every evening. The first time, he was stiff, formal, presenting himself like a soldier reporting for duty. By the fifth time, something had shifted. He arrived earlier, stayed longer. They talked before and after, halting conversations that gradually grew more fluid. He told her about the border wars, not the glory or the victories, but the cost. And the men he had lost, the choices that haunted him. She told him about her childhood, about her mother's banishment, about the years spent invisible in her father's house. They feared you, Riven said one night, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. That is why they tried to make you small. Does it not trouble you? Neve asked. What I am? You speak to beasts. You calm creatures that would kill anyone else. His voice was matter of fact. Why would that trouble me? Valdris has been mine for 17 years. He never accepted anyone. Then you touched him, and he knelt. A pause. Whatever lives in your blood, Neve, it is not something to fear. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to forget Sorrel's words, forget the hollowing, forget the dead songbirds and the stable boy who had followed her like a shadow before fever took him. But even as she lay in Riven's arms, she noticed things. The cold that radiated from him seemed to be intensifying. Some nights, she woke shivering despite the fire blazing in the hearth, his body beside hers like a block of ice. Dark circles had appeared beneath his eyes. His movements, always precise, had become fractionally slower. You're getting worse, she said one evening as he arrived at her chambers. Don't deny it. I can see it. Riven paused in the doorway. It is nothing. It is not nothing. Your skin is colder every night. You barely eat. When was the last time you slept more than 2 hours? His jaw tightened. You notice too much. I notice you. The words came out fiercer than she intended. Whatever is happening to you, whatever you're hiding, I want to help. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. A change passed through those winter gray eyes, something that might have been gratitude or might have been fear. It is a family condition, he said finally, nothing that can be helped. He refused to elaborate further, but that night, he held her closer than ever, his cold arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she might disappear. Time passed. Neve found herself seeking him out during the day, something that fell outside their arrangement. She brought him meals when he worked late in his study. She sat with him during council meetings, silent but present. She walked with Valdris in the mornings, and sometimes Riven appeared beside her, matching her pace without comment. The mate bond was forming. She could feel it. A golden thread between them that grew stronger with every passing day. She craved him when he was away, and he seemed to crave her just as intensely. Some nights they barely spoke. He would appear at her door, eyes burning with something that looked almost desperate, and they would fall into each other with an urgency that left them both breathless. Other nights, he simply held her. Those nights frightened her more, because Riven, who had sworn he would never love her, held her like she was the only warm thing in a world made of ice. 2 months after their wedding, Neve woke before dawn with a certainty she could not explain. She lay still, one hand pressed to her stomach, and knew. The healer confirmed it that afternoon. She waited until evening, until Riven arrived at her chambers with his usual careful knock. She let him enter. Let him begin the now familiar ritual of moving toward her before she spoke. I'm pregnant. Riven froze. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then his hand found her stomach, pressing gently against the fabric of her nightgown as if he might feel the life growing beneath. "You are certain?" The healer confirmed it, 2 months along. His breath caught. And then, impossibly, Alpha King Riven, the man who had sworn he could never love, smiled. It transformed his face. The severity softened. The coldness cracked. For one moment, he looked like the man he might have been before war and duty, and whatever curse ran through his blood had frozen him solid. "A child," he breathed. "Our child." "You're happy," Neve said, wonder in her voice. "Happy?" He pulled her close, his cold arms wrapping around her with fierce tenderness. "Neve, I do not have words." She buried her face in his chest, his heart beat against her ear, slow and steady. The cold of his body no longer bothered her. She had grown accustomed to it, had learned to find comfort in it. But beneath the joy, fear coiled in her stomach. He had what he needed now, an heir. The purpose of their arrangement fulfilled. He would stop visiting. He would retreat to his separate life. She would lose him. The thought rose unbidden, and with it came a flood of emotion she had been suppressing for weeks. All the small kindnesses, all the careful considerations, all the nights he had held her like she mattered. "Riven," she whispered against his chest. "What happens now?" "Now?" He pulled back to look at her, confusion crossing his features. "Now we prepare for our child. Now we—" "No. I mean—" She forced herself to meet his eyes. "You said once the heirs were secured, we would not— that you would not—" Understanding dawned on his face, and with it, something like panic. "Neve, I need to know." The words poured out, unstoppable. "These past months, they have meant something to me. You have meant something to me. But if this is the end, if you're going to disappear now that you have what you needed, I need to know. I need to prepare myself." Riven stared at her. The color had drained from his face, leaving him pale as snow. "You think I would leave?" His voice was hoarse. "After everything? You promised you would never love me." Tears burned in her eyes. "You were very clear about that." "I was wrong." The words hung between them like a held breath. "What?" Neve whispered. "I was wrong." He cupped her face in his cold hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Neve, God's help me. He stopped. His eyes went wide. His hand flew to his chest. "Riven?" Neve grabbed his arms. "Riven, what's wrong?" He didn't answer. His face had gone white as winter snow. His entire body began to tremble, a fine shaking that intensified with every passing second. "I can't," he gasped, clutching at his heart. "It's too late. I tried to stop it. Tried not to." His legs buckled. Neve caught him as he fell, lowering them both to the floor. His skin was no longer cold. It was freezing, so cold it burned, frost beginning to form on his shirt. "Help!" she screamed. "Someone help! The king is dying!" Guards burst through the door. Servants came running, but Neve barely noticed them. She held Riven in her arms, watching ice spread across his chest, watching the life drain from his winter-gray eyes. "I tried not to love you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The curse. If I ever truly loved someone, my heart would freeze. I would die." A ghost of a smile crossed his frost-touched lips. "But you made it impossible. You made it so impossible." "No," Neve sobbed. "No, this can't be happening. I'm sorry." His hand found hers, cold as death itself. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you more time. I'm sorry I—" His eyes fluttered closed. His body went still. And Neve, holding the frozen form of the man she had grown to love, screamed until her voice gave out. 3 days. 3 days of sitting vigil beside Riven's frozen body. 3 days of watching the ice spread across his chest, creep up his throat, inch toward his face. 3 days of healers shaking their heads and advisors whispering about succession. Neve had not slept, had barely eaten. The child growing inside her seemed like a cruel joke now, a life beginning as another ended. "There must be something," she said to the council, her voice hoarse from crying and screaming and begging. "Some cure, some magic, something." The advisors exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Your Majesty?" The eldest began carefully. "The curse on the royal line is ancient, placed by a powerful witch centuries ago, meant to ensure the kings of Thornreach would never be weakened by emotion. There is no known cure." "Then find an unknown one." Neve's hands clenched into fists. "Search every archive, contact every witch. I don't care if it's forbidden. I don't care if it costs everything I have. Find a way to save him." Silence. "Your Majesty," another advisor ventured, "perhaps it would be wise to begin preparing for what comes next. The succession must be secured. If the child you carry is male, get out." The words came out quiet, deadly. "Your Majesty." "I said get out. All of you. Now." They fled. Neve turned back to Riven's frozen form. The ice had claimed most of his torso now, a crystalline shell that glittered in the firelight. His face remained untouched, peaceful in unconsciousness, but she knew it was only a matter of time. "I won't let you die," she whispered, taking his frozen hand. "Do you hear me? I won't." But how? She was a beast speaker, not a healer. Her power lay in communication with animals, not curing ancient curses. What could she possibly offer against magic this old, this powerful? Unless, the thought struck her like lightning. Sorrel had said beast speakers drained life, that anyone who loved them weakened and died. The hollowing. But what if that was wrong? What if her power wasn't about taking, but about connecting? Every animal she had ever touched had trusted her. Valdris, the war horse that had killed before, had knelt at her feet. Creatures that should have feared her had sought her out instead. What if her power could connect to Riven too? Neve closed her eyes. She reached for that place inside her, the warm, humming presence that had always lived beneath her skin. The power she had been taught to fear, to suppress, to hide. She let it rise. Heat flooded through her, rushing down her arms and into her hands. She pressed her palms against Riven's frozen chest, willing her warmth into him, willing that connection she shared with every creature to extend to the man she loved. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ice beneath her hands began to melt. Neve's eyes flew open. Water trickled down Riven's sides, the crystalline shell receding where her palms pressed. It was working. Her warmth, her power, whatever lived in her beast speaker blood, it was melting the curse. But not fast enough. The ice spread faster than she could melt it. For every inch that thawed beneath her hands, another inch froze at the edges. She was fighting a losing battle. She needed more power, more warmth, more of whatever made her what she was. And suddenly, she knew exactly who might have answers. The Vance estate loomed against the evening sky, its familiar towers now feeling foreign and hostile. Neve dismounted before the gates, flanked by 4 of Riven's personal guards. "Wait here," she commanded. She strode through halls she had once crept through as a servant, past rooms where she had been invisible, toward the study where her father conducted his cruelties. Aldrich Vance sat by the fire, a glass of wine in his hand. When Neve burst through the door, his expression shifted from surprise to disgust. "You." He did not rise. "Come to gloat? I heard your husband is dying." "Seems fitting. The Beast Speaker's curse claims another victim." "You're going to tell me everything." Neve's voice shook with fury. "About my power, about the hollowing, about what you've been hiding all these years." Aldrich laughed. "Why would I tell you anything? Because if you don't, I will have you dragged to Thornreach in chains and executed for treason against your queen." The laughter died. "The hollowing," Neve pressed forward. "Sorrel said beast speakers drain life from those who love them." She said Tristan died because of me, the songbirds, Mother's hunting hound. All of them died because I'm cursed. Something flickered in her father's eyes, something that looked almost like satisfaction. Sorrel told you what I told her to tell you? Aldrich said slowly. The hollowing is real. It's documented in the old texts. Beast speakers are parasites. They feed on the life force of those around them. Then why am I not dead? Neve demanded. Why hasn't my own life drained away? Aldrich's jaw tightened. Father. The voice came from the doorway. Sorrel stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide. What is she talking about? Nothing. Go back to your rooms. No. Sorrel stepped inside, looking between them. I told her what you told me, about the hollowing, about Tristan. But she's asking questions that don't make sense. Her voice trembled. Father, what haven't you told us? Aldrich's composure cracked. This is none of your concern. It is my concern. Neve moved closer, her beast speaker power humming beneath her skin. Because I just melted cursed ice with my hands. My power isn't draining life. It's giving warmth. It's creating connection. So either the old texts are wrong, or someone has been lying to me my entire life. Silence crashed over the room. Then Aldrich laughed again, but this time it was bitter, ugly. You want the truth? Fine. He set down his wineglass with deliberate precision. The hollowing is a myth. A story I constructed to keep you afraid, to keep you controllable, to ensure you never discovered what you actually were. Neve's blood went cold. What? Beast speakers don't drain life. They share it. They can heal wounds, cure sickness, and connect with any living creature through pure life force. His lip curled. Your grandmother had the gift. My mother. She could have been the most powerful healer in 3 kingdoms, but my father feared what she might become. Feared she would grow too powerful, too independent. So he convinced her that her gift was a curse, that she was killing everyone she touched. No, Sorrel whispered. She believed him, isolated herself, refused to use her power. And when she finally died, bitter and broken and alone, to my father burned every accurate text about beast speakers and replaced them with lies. Aldrich's eyes found Neve's. I simply continued his work. The world tilted. Tristan, Neve managed. The stable boy, he died of fever. He died because I poisoned his water. Aldrich said it casually, as if discussing the weather. He was getting too close to you, making you happy. I couldn't have that. I needed you to believe you were dangerous. So I gave you proof. Neve couldn't breathe. The songbirds. Crushed them myself while you slept. Mother's hound? Rat poison. Rather effective. Something shattered inside Neve's chest. Every death she had blamed herself for. Every moment of guilt and shame and horror. All of it manufactured. All of it lies. Why? The word tore from her throat. Why would you do this to me? Because you were proof of my shame. Aldrich's voice finally showed emotion, pure, venomous hatred. My mother was a beast speaker. My blood carries the curse. Every time I looked at you, I saw her. I saw the weakness in my bloodline. I wanted you broken, invisible, terrified of your own power. His smile was cruel. And it worked. Until that damned horse ruined everything. Movement exploded from Neve's peripheral vision. Sorrel's fist connected with their father's face. The crack of bone echoed through the study. Aldrich stumbled backward, blood streaming from his nose, and crashed into the fireplace mantel. His head struck stone with a sickening thud. He collapsed and did not move. Silence. Sorrel stood over their father's unconscious body, her hands shaking, her face streaked with tears. He killed Tristan, she whispered. He murdered an innocent boy to torture you. He poisoned Mother's hound. He crushed your birds. Her voice broke. All those years I believed him. All those years I hated you for something you never did. Neve stared at her sister. at the woman who had tormented her, believed the worst of her, threatened her happiness, at the woman who had just struck their father in her defense. "We can talk about this later," Neve said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Right now, I need to save my husband." Sorrel straightened, wiping her eyes. "What do you need?" Every text father didn't burn. Everything about beast speakers, about healing, about life sharing. There has to be something in his study. "I know where he keeps his private collection." Sorrel was already moving. "Follow me." Behind them, guards secured their father's unconscious form. Ahead lay answers, hope, and the desperate chance to save a dying king. Neve had spent her whole life believing she was a curse. Now she would prove she was the cure. The texts were hidden behind a false panel in Aldrich's study, yellowed pages bound in leather that cracked with age. Neve read by candlelight as Sorrel stood guard, the words blurring through her tears. "Life-sharing," she murmured, tracing the ancient script. "Beast speakers can extend their life force to any creature they have bonded with. The deeper the bond, the more powerful the healing." "Does it say how?" Sorrel asked. "Direct contact, heart to heart. The beast speaker must open themselves completely, hold nothing back, and allow their essence to flow into the one they wish to save." Neve's hands trembled. "It says the risk is significant. If the illness or curse is too powerful, it can drain the healer instead. Kill them both." "Then don't do it." "I have to." Neve stood, clutching the text to her chest. "He's dying, Sorrel. The ice is spreading every hour. If I don't try, he'll be dead by morning. And if you do try and fail, you'll both be dead. Along with the child you carry." Neve's hand went to her stomach. The life growing there, barely begun, depending on her survival. But so was Riven. "I have to try," she repeated. "I love him." Sorrel was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Then let me come with you. Whatever happens, you shouldn't face it alone." The sisters rode through the night, pushing their horses hard across mountain roads slick with frost. Dawn was breaking when they reached the fortress, in its gray walls gilded pink by the rising sun. Neve burst into Riven's chambers to find him worse than she had left him. The ice had climbed past his throat now, crystallizing across his jaw, frosting his lips blue. His breath came in shallow whispers, barely stirring the air. "Everyone out," Neve commanded. The servants fled. Only Sorrel remained, standing guard by the door. Neve approached the bed. She could feel the cold radiating from Riven's body, feel the curse's power pulsing like a malevolent heartbeat. This was ancient magic, powerful and cruel. It had taken root in his bloodline for generations, and she was going to rip it out. She climbed onto the bed, positioning herself over him. "Heart to heart," the text had said. She pressed her palm flat against his frozen chest, feeling the ice bite into her skin. Then she closed her eyes and reached for her power. It came differently this time, not a trickle but a flood, warmth pouring through her like sunlight after endless winter. She felt it rush down her arm, into her palm, into the frozen wasteland of his chest. The ice resisted. It pushed back, cold clawing at her warmth, trying to freeze the life right out of her. Neve pushed harder. She thought of every moment they had shared. The first time he had asked her permission. The blindfold he had offered. The nights he had held her like she was precious. The way he had smiled, truly smiled, when she told him about the baby. She thought of the man beneath the curse, the warrior who had protected her from crowds, the king who had silenced her father with a single word, the husband who had fought against his own heart to keep her safe. "I love you," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Come back to me." The warmth intensified. She felt it pouring out of her in waves, felt her own strength beginning to waver. The text had warned about this. The healer could drain themselves completely if the curse was too strong. Neve didn't care. She gave everything, every ounce of warmth, every spark of life force, and every bit of love she had been afraid to feel for so long. She poured herself into him like water into a vessel, filling the frozen spaces with light. The ice began to crack. Hairline fractures spread across his chest, spider webbing outward. Water ran in rivulets, soaking the sheets. The blue faded from his lips. Color returned to his cheeks. And then, like a dam breaking, the curse shattered. Riven gasped, his eyes flying open. His body arched off the bed as warmth flooded back into him, his heart pounding beneath her palm with strong, steady beats. Neve. Her name came out hoarse, desperate. His hand found hers, and for the first time since she had known him, his skin was warm, truly warm. What did you... How... Beast speakers don't drain life, she managed, tears streaming down her face. We share it. Everything Father told me was a lie. I was never cursed. She laughed, half sobbing. I was always the cure. Riven stared at her. Then his arms came around her, crushing her against his chest, and she could feel his heart beating strong and fast, feel the warmth radiating from his skin like he had swallowed the sun. I thought I was dying, he whispered into her hair. I thought I would never see you again. You're not dying. The curse is broken, not just for you. She pulled back to look at him, to see the life blazing in his winter gray eyes. For the whole bloodline, our son will never have to fear love. Something broke open in Riven's expression. All the walls, all the ice, and all the careful control he had maintained for years, it crumbled, and what remained was raw and real and beautiful. I love you, he said, the words coming out fierce and certain. I tried not to. I fought it with everything I had. But you made it impossible, Neve. You and your warmth and your courage and your impossible, infuriating refusal to give up on me. I know, she said softly. I love you too. He kissed her then, and for the first time his lips were warm. 6 months later, Neve stood in the courtyard of Thornreach Palace, their son cradled in her arms. They had returned to the capital after Riven's recovery, leaving the mountain fortress behind. The cold stone walls that had once felt like safety now seemed unnecessary. There was nothing left to hide from, no curse to outrun. So they had come home to rule from the heart of the kingdom together. They had named him Calder, meaning cold water becoming warm. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, and when Valdris approached the infant for the first time, the great war horse had lowered his massive head with a gentleness that made the gathered crowd gasp. He's going to be a beast speaker, Neve murmured, watching her son reach for Valdris's muzzle with tiny, grasping fingers. Then we will make sure he knows the truth about his gift. Riven's arm tightened around her waist. No more lies. No more fear. The Academy for Beast Speakers had opened 3 months ago, the first of its kind in Thornreach's history. Young children with the gift were being identified and trained, taught to heal rather than hide, to connect rather than isolate. Riven had signed the decree himself, declaring Beast Speaker blood a blessing rather than a curse. Aldrich Vance rotted in a cell beneath the palace, convicted of murder, conspiracy, and treason against the crown. Neve had not visited him. She had nothing left to say. Sorrel, however, visited weekly. Not out of love, but out of some need Neve did not entirely understand. Perhaps closure, perhaps penance, perhaps simply the need to look into their father's eyes and remind him that his cruelty had failed. Your Majesty. A guard approached, bowing. The delegation from the southern kingdoms has arrived. They wish to discuss trade agreements. Riven sighed. Tell them I will be there shortly. The guard retreated. Riven turned to Neve, pressing a kiss to her forehead, then one to Calder's downy head. I wanted you to myself today, he murmured. You have me every night, Neve reminded him, smiling. Not enough. Never enough. But he pulled away reluctantly, squeezing her hand. I will return as soon as I can. She watched him go. This man who had once promised he could never love her. This king who had chosen a servant girl and a demon horse over every princess in 3 kingdoms. This husband who had almost died rather than stop loving her. Valdris nudged her shoulder, breath warm against her neck. Neve leaned into the war horse's familiar presence, feeling the connection that had started everything. "You knew, didn't you?" she murmured. "That first day. You knew I was what he needed." Valdris huffed, a sound that might have been agreement. Neve laughed, shifting Calder to one arm so she could stroke the horse's velvet nose. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing me." The war horse that had thrown every Luna candidate, that had killed and maimed and refused every touch, lowered his great head and rested it against her shoulder. And in the courtyard of Thornreach Palace, surrounded by the warmth of her son and the loyalty of an impossible horse, and the love of a king who had learned to thaw, Neve finally understood what she had always been: not a curse, not a shame, not a creature to be hidden and feared. She was warmth itself, connection itself. It's the bridge between wild things and broken kings, between ancient magic and simple love. She was exactly where she belonged.